for joining us for today, the business skills for family lawyers, what law school didn't teach you. Well, that's a lot. This session has been accredited for 1 hour professionalism with the Law Society. So as I said earlier today, please go in and get those CPD hours. So we have a whole host of topics here. Today, we're going to discuss the gap in legal education, transitioning into leadership, essential business skills for family lawyers, overcoming the should know mentality, effective delegation and team management, business development, client acquisition, financial literacy, practice management, and investing in professional coaching. Guys, how are you going to do this in 1 hour? I don't even know. I can't even say it. I had to take 3 breaths in that. So as always, we encourage everyone to participate in our polls and ask questions throughout the event. We'll try to get to all of them today. All the resources mentioned today will be included in the show notes, and you're going to get those later this week. And now, without further ado, let me introduce our two panelists. Steve is the founder and principal lawyer of Benmor Family Law Group, a boutique matrimonial law firm in downtown Toronto. He is a certified specialist in family law and was admitted as a fellow to the prestigious International Academy of Family Lawyers. Steve is regularly retained as a divorce mediator, arbitrator, and parenting coordinator. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me, Michelle, and hello, Paulette.
Hi, Steve.
Paulette is the CEO for Creative Choices for the 21st Century Lawyer Incorporated and a certified career coach and strategist. A 21st century lawyer herself, she built a platform of services exclusively for lawyers after identifying a gap in career building skills in the profession. Paulette has helped hundreds of lawyers develop personal brands rooted in their values, leading to stronger client engagement. And her expertise has been sought by law firms of all sizes to boost business development, client conversion, and practice growth. She brings a practical, values-driven approach to bridging the gap between legal education and essential business skills for lawyers. All right, and you guys have heard about me. I've introduced myself a couple of times today. So moving right along, I think we have a poll. Is that right, team? All right, so you guys are going to see it magically appear on the screen in front of you. Please go ahead and participate. And our poll question, when you crossed the stage after law school, did you feel you had all of the business skills to own and operate your own law practice? Wow.
Steve, I want to know what you were thinking as you crossed that stage.
Don't trip.
I had 2 sets of family who weren't speaking to each other at the end of the program, and I had to mediate as a newly graduated LLB between 2 feuding family members. So that was what was on my mind.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness. Well, we are babies, right? I was a baby when I crossed that stage. And the thing is, and I always say this, you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't realize how woefully underprepared you are for the business aspect of all of this and all the things that, that you should have learned or you should have turned your mind to. But that came with time. And definitely for you both, I know you've both done an amazing job in your professions. All right, let's see some answers. How did we do on our polls? Nope. There we go. Oops. All right, guys. Sorry, just taking a minute to open it up. Okay. All right. Yeah. So most of us said that they didn't feel that they had enough information, and that's not a surprise, right, guys? Steve and Paulette. So starting into that, why don't we go directly into our first topic, which is the gap in legal education. Paulette, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising that we heard that answer. And to the audience, just so you want to understand why we asked it, we just wanted to get a sense of also like this generation of lawyers, because when Steve and I and Michelle went to law school, it was a different curriculum. But to me, that really just proves the point that our legal education hasn't changed much, that it's still narrow in its focus. And I think it necessarily has to be in terms of thinking like a lawyer. I mean, that goes without question, but there are complementary ancillary skills that are necessary to also practice the law, like, reading a financial statement, right? Like understanding how to read profit and loss statement, how to set billable targets, like how to manage a trust account beyond compliance. So there are things that law schools are leaving out. Now, I mean, I know law schools have become more progressive. There are externships and things like that where different types of practical, like, legal skills are being exposed earlier, which I think is great. But as far as I'm aware, like in terms of business skills, you'd have to get like a dual degree in business law and business, or do some other training or education. And it's just problematic because it leads to some of the other problems that we're going to talk about later on, where people feel like they should know these things once they do receive their law degrees. And I think for family lawyers in particular, I think that can add just another layer to an already difficult yet rewarding practice, right? It's emotionally challenging. You've got lots of different aspects that you're trying to manage as a family lawyer, like not to mention, like, do you also need like a social work degree? But, to understand all of that financial aspect of it, I just feel like for family lawyers, there's so much to navigate that you need to know. Like, to me, I think of like, that can all like, amount to burnout pretty quickly, which is a problem for all lawyers. But as I was reflecting on family lawyers in particular, I think you do have a lot more that you need to know to practice the law.
Let me jump in and add to that, when it comes to law school, you've got a lot of entry points into law. You have people who, first of all, mature students, they've had prior careers, they come into law school in that way. You've got people that are coming from other jurisdictions, in some cases from other provinces. What's the difference between somebody that spent the last 25 years of their life living in an urban center versus out in the country? So when we talk about the different entry points, you've got people who come from very different backgrounds entering law school. That's number one. Number two is there's a lot of people that start law school, such as myself, who didn't know what life was going to look like upon graduation. Was I going to work for a big firm? Was I going to work for a corporation? Was I going to open up my own practice? Was I going to be a partner? Now, the business skills that you need are going to differ based on the course of action that you take. So if you are entering first year of law school or exiting third year of law school, and it's your intention to be in-house counsel for a corporation or to work at a legal clinic or to be an associate at a large Bay Street law firm, the sort of business skills that you'll need are going to be very different than if you're running a practice like Russell Alexander, Steve Benmor, or Paulette Nnorom. So first things first, where are you? Where did you come from? And where are you going? And if you can answer those three questions, then you're going to know what sort of skill sets you're going to need to acquire in order to run a successful career as a lawyer. I myself went into law school with a significant amount of business skill. I knew how to sell, I knew how to buy, I certainly knew ROI, I knew the difference between value for a customer versus value that customers will not pay for. These are important sort of base innate skills that are, for me anyway, it was intuitive. And so when we talk about somebody buying an hour of Paulette's time or Russell's time or my time, one of the things that weighs heavily on me is what I charge less expensive than the value that the client gets? And that is partly economic and partly psychological. And so these are innate skills that some people have. And if they don't, they need to acquire them. And sadly, to the category of this program, law school does not teach that. And so the person in first year law, third year law, or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 years outside of law school needs to figure out which course of action am I taking in my career and what sort of business skills do I need?
Absolutely, Steve. Those are all such great points. And then, life happens. You have a business plan and you really should be looking at it every couple of years because things change, whether the direction that you're taking with your company changes or whether there's staffing changes. And now you've got, for instance, for me, my greatest um, fear is the trust balances and reconciling all of that, doing that work. But if you've got a great accountant or a great bookkeeper or a great person in your team who's doing that, then you may say, okay, now I need to, you know, redelegate myself and put myself somewhere else and, take up this part of the business. All right. So thank you both for that. Why don't we move on to our next poll? So, what is your greatest challenge as a leader? Reluctance to delegate, handling employee HR issues, non-billable practice management, or business development and marketing? So, thank you so much for running that for us in the background, Daphne. We have our results already. So, the number one thing that people are challenged by and concerned by is the non-billable practice management. We've got 45% of people. Next, we've got the reluctance to delegate, 24% of people. Business development and marketing at 21%, and then handling employee HR issues, we're at 10%. So while we're on that topic, Paulette, do you mind if I lob you a question?
Sure.
All right. So this is a great one that came in from an audience member. Why do you think traditional legal education continues to underplay business and leadership skills? If law schools were to change, sorry, I guess it's a two-parter. If law schools were to change just one thing, what would you want them to teach to better prepare lawyers for practice management?
Um, I think having definitely as an offering client-focused financial literacy. So I think reading financial statements like is a must. And just recalling on my own experience, like it wasn't until I started practicing that I even knew what that was. And I felt this pressure to um, think that I should have known this somehow. Like, did I miss a class? Did I, did I skip something because it was presented to me as, just such a basic form of information? And now with, artificial intelligence, it would have been very easy to access that information. Back then, not so much. But I think, breaking down the kinds of information that clients bring to you, possibly in terms of building that financial literacy, because I feel like financial literacy is actually like such a deficit of lawyers, notwithstanding what Steve has presented. I feel like you're a bit of a unicorn, Steve, in terms of what you brought with you to the practice of law. But I do feel like financial literacy is something that lawyers do need significant help with. And I think law school would be the perfect place for that.
Let me jump in on the poll results, and that I'm looking at them right now. This notion of non-billable practice management skills is a challenge as a leader, 45%, and reluctance to delegate, 24%. And so when I look at those two together, I actually see them almost one, because if you know how to delegate, you may very well find that the time that you have available to do actual legal work for clients that you can charge for will go up. Now, lawyers like me, and most likely all of the people watching, are perfectionists. They like things being done a certain way. And that's the reason they got into university. That's the reason they did well on their LSAT. That's the reason they got into law school. That's the reason they probably got an articling job. They tend to be people that want to get the right answer. And giving somebody else the privilege of answering a question that somebody's asked you is something that people don't like doing when they are perfectionists. So lawyers have a hard time delegating. Now, as it turns out, a lot of the work that we do that's non-billable is delegatable. The work that we're supposed to be doing, which is what we have been asked by clients to do, which is what clients will be prepared to pay us for, that's the part that we need to focus our energy on. Now, any business owner knows that you can't have 100% of your professional service time devoted to billable time. But in fairness, if you look at a work week, whatever number you want to set for yourself, 40 hours, 30 hours, 50 hours, if you could say, look, I'm going to devote a third to the business and two-thirds in the business. I'm going to spend one-third working on the business and two-thirds working in the business. And if you were to be able to track that, it's almost like you're a split personality. Part of you is business owner, part of you is service provider. And it's important to keep track on the ROI on both. So for example, if you are spending 15 hours a week writing articles, speaking at events, connecting with people over lunch or dinner, hanging out on social media and engaging with other people, that should produce, for example, new calls, revenues, new clients, and so forth. And then that allow you to spend the time on the other parts of the practice that actually generate revenue. And the more you generate revenue, the more you can pay people to do the one-third that you originally did, possibly shrinking it to one quarter or one-fifth. And so a very good business owner knows where their value is and knows where their value is not. And to take somebody that's being able to bill out at $300 to $600 an hour and have work that they're doing that they could pay somebody $50 an hour for is not good business sense. And that requires tremendous discipline.
And that's the challenge, I think, that we have transitioning as lawyers into these more positions of responsibility. Because everything that you said, Steve, I wish that I had you as a mentor or somebody who was sharing that knowledge and wisdom with me. So if we're talking about the difficulties that lawyers have transitioning into leadership roles, is that there is an expectation that that knowledge and maybe even that skill set is somehow magically going to appear when it just doesn't work that way. Just as we became lawyers and having to go to law school for 3 years, the same goes with these other skills, this other knowledge. And I think that's the problem when junior associates become senior associates, and now they're, responsible for maybe leading and dealing with clients more and being responsible for the billing. Like there's a new subset of skills that go along with that. And I see from my practice, a lot of this is done where no supporting coaching or mentorship is provided with this promotion.
Except for you, Paulette, because that's precisely what you offer lawyers, especially young and junior lawyers, the necessary coaching skills to be able to set a target and then achieve that target. And you also serve as an accountability manager to make sure that they stay on track to do so. Quite frankly, no different than a fitness trainer.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Don't you see it, Steve, as a responsibility of the employer to impart this knowledge as well and to set up some sort of training?
Smart employers, not just in law, in all fields, do that. For those of you that are Netflix or Crave fans, you might know of a TV show that I watched from beginning to end and loved called Billions. And in the show Billions, there is an in-house industrial psychologist, in effect, a performance coach who helped every one of the hedge fund traders succeed to their maximum ability beyond what they could have even imagined for themselves. And that's precisely your role, Nanette, and other people like Nanette who help executives achieve greatness. And sometimes it's actually psychological. You know, sometimes people literally put a glass ceiling above themselves and they say, well, I can't do more. I'm not the kind of person that goes to a social event and hands out business cards, or I have nothing to add, so I can't write an article, or I don't post on LinkedIn. No, 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 no. That's not true. If you have a law degree, you have something that other people don't know. And if you chose to go into law, law is one of those fields of work where you actually have to deal with other people. You cannot hide in a cave and be a lawyer. Now, you know, there's different areas of law and there's different roles within law, but for the most part, law is a social and academic profession. You have to think, but you also have to talk and you also have to listen. And if you can do those three things, talk, listen, and engage with people, you'll be a good lawyer and you'll be a good business owner of your law practice.
That's great advice, guys. I'm learning so much already. So, do you have any real life scenarios illustrating some of the common pitfalls that people see?
Well, I'll jump in on that one. You know, I think it was like 20 years ago, I walked into the Gap in a mall and I looked at the person's name tag who greeted me when I walked in, and it said associate. And I started reading about the psychology of large retailers. They started training even the lowest level employee as though they were part owner of the success of the business and some of their revenues. Like if a sales associate sold X dollars in their shift, they got a little bit extra. They felt invested. We lawyers, we hire a lot of support staff and we ask them to do just this, but we don't engage them and include them in the large project. And if we were to be more inclusive and treat each case, each client, each project as a team effort, now you're going to get people far more engaged. And so when I hire and train a new person, whether it's a law clerk, a paralegal, a articling student, or a young lawyer, I want them to treat my business as though it's their business. My success equals their success. Their success equals my success. And quite frankly, even on the minutia, when they docket point 0.5 for something, I want them to look at that as though they are paying for it. What you just docketed 0.54, if you were the buyer of that, would you find value in that? Would you run to pay that bill? Would you send a thank you card to the person that just docketed you 0.5? If you can do all that, if you can empathize and put yourself in the position of the buyer, the consumer of the legal services, now you're part of my team. Now you're part of my family. And now my family is your family. And our success is owned by every one of us. And that's a different way of thinking than lawyers of the past, where you graduated law school, you joined a firm, and you just put your nose down to the grindstone and docketed X hours per day or per year. This is a very different mindset. And you need to make everybody in the office, from the bookkeeper all the way to the senior lawyer, part of the script, part of the plot. Everybody is on stage at this production, although there are different roles, and sometimes different people get the applause or the bow. But just like when you go to a show, they often at the end, the actors come on stage, and then everybody's standing up and clapping, and then the actor generally points to the orchestra and then points to the lighting crew, because all of them made the show go on.
And I think that's Michelle, I just wanted to jump in here just to maybe highlight the different models of law firm management that exist. And we are in a time where there is much more experimentation and um, a lot of different ways to run a law firm. And what you're describing sounds to me like an ideal way, Steve. And yet there are other places. I'm thinking of a client who I worked with recently who was working at a firm and was trained by a partner who only focused on the substantive skills and never really spent the time to train this associate who later became a partner on the business side of skills. And then maybe people in the audience will be familiar with this. Then that partner retires. And not all of that work went to that associate that they had trained. And now that associate who has become a partner is left in, their 8th year of practice trying to learn how to develop a business. And that is a real challenge for many lawyers out there, unfortunately. And it is, as I was listening to you, Steve, I just wanted to address this quickly, Michelle, is that is something that maybe if you are looking for work to really understand how an organization really does train its associates, its lawyers, how the business sort of acumen is shared with people. And that could be a helpful thing to know as you're investigating in a job search, for example.
Absolutely. Those are some great points. Okay, so while you guys are chatting, Daphne ran our next poll, and the poll was, what thought crosses your mind most about business and leadership skills? So C, I don't feel qualified. That's so sad. We want everyone here to feel qualified and, to feel like they have a place at the table. A, 26% of us, I should already know this by now. D, I'll seek help when I need it, 19%. And then I'll figure it out as I go, 11%. What were you guys feeling when you were starting your own businesses? What was
Somebody once said to me, look in the mirror, find your greatest weakness, and then make that your number one priority. And then keep doing that until you go down the list and start all over again. And so, yes, as I said before, law is a social career. And some people, they don't feel so comfortable being in the social environment. And so there's different ways to approach that. You could actually find a wing person, and then you and the wing person together go to a law association event or a CBA event or a advocate society event, and or you contact one of your old classmates and you say, hey, would you like to go with me to such and such? I'll buy the tickets. And so you slowly build a small social network from which you can meander and move around. And that way you're building a network. That's one way. Another way is, which didn't exist when we graduated from law school, social media. There's so many ways for people to connect with other people on social media. LinkedIn, for one, is a fantastic way. Uh, Listen, people can throw themselves into LinkedIn or social media for hours a day, read articles, learn, connect with people. There's umpteen ways for people to not respond to the poll by saying, I really don't feel comfortable doing that, because there's a way to sort of slowly get out of that discomfort and finding ways in which to connect with others. Now, I'll just tell you personally, when I graduated from law school and I came to Toronto, one of the things that was very important to me was community involvement, both within my religious community, but also in my professional community. And so I started volunteering. And so I would devote an hour here or an hour there. And slowly but surely, it just became part of my life. And for the last 30 plus years, there hasn't been a moment in time when I haven't sat on a committee or on a board or some association and where I haven't volunteered to to draft something or to take care of a project. And it's allowed me to be engaged, but more importantly, it's allowed me to connect and meet people that I would have never otherwise met. And and that is a tremendous opportunity that's available to lawyers and law students because you can build a network from day one.
That's such great advice, Steve. Thank you so much for that. All right, so I know we've got so many audience questions coming in. I'll try to get to them all. But while I'm looking at all these come in, Paulette, why don't we start with overcoming the should know mentality?
I started volunteering, and so I would devote an hour here.
Sorry, I'm just hearing the feedback. I feel like it's Steve talking again.
Don't worry, we are working in the background so that I'll work on that in the background.
So that should mentality, we've already alluded to it, and so it's that that misconception that just because I went to law school, I should know all of these things outside of law school training, right? And so I've passed the bar, and now I should know everything about running a practice, leading a team, handling a difficult client. And so I think that comes from some of what Steve was talking about earlier, the legal profession attracting certain personalities, a lot of type A personalities, perfectionism is rampant. And so I think as a result of people who genuinely want to do their best and bring their best to the work that they do, set expectations from themselves that are too high and they're unreasonable. And so thinking that, okay, I should know these things that I'm being asked to do. And instead of, using a curiosity and learning mindset, it'd be like, okay, so I don't know what that is. I've got to figure it out, shaming themselves and saying like, well, why don't I know that? And starting from a place of deficiency as opposed to a place of, okay, well, this is a learning opportunity. And I mean, that compounds into many other things where someone can really take a turn for the worse in their career when they allow that should mentality to really dominate their mindset. But all is not lost. I mean, there are many people who I work with where it's really a lot of it has to do with confidence. And confidence isn't something that I coach head on. I can't say, oh, I'm going to coach you to be more confident. It's always, I tell people it's the outcome or the consequence of other things that we work on together. So it could be like, okay, so you didn't know the answer to that question. What are some of the options that you have because you didn't know how to do that thing that was being asked of you? Okay, and then so we start working from a place of let's retrack and deconstruct what happened there and show more possibilities that existed for you to think about yourself and to think about that assignment and sort of trying to create habits around those responses opposed to the default ones that the person has developed over time, because eventually it becomes a habit, right? A cognitive distortion. And these things are possible. It takes practice, it takes accountability, like Steve mentioned. It's not about perfection because you'll encounter yourself thinking that way sometimes, but it is about just looking at yourself through a much more productive lens and just trying to reframe things in your mind to see, for example, well, okay, if it's called the practice of law, that suggests that it's lifelong learning. Would you not agree? It's the practice of law. It's not the perfection of law. And so if it's the practice of law, it means you're going to be constantly learning. Isn't that true? Yeah. Okay. So what do you need to learn? What did you see today that you needed to learn? Wow. Yeah. Okay. So let's come up with a plan, right? Have you learned things in the past? What did you need to learn last week or last month? At and did you figure those things out? Yeah. Okay, so you're capable of learning too. So it's really just about changing people's perspective. Obviously, that's a very one-dimensional view of this topic when we're talking about the should. There are many other things that could be at play here. This is just one where I am sharing with you that comes up quite a bit in my coaching practice, where that kind of work is really great at sort of breaking down some of these barriers that we have let or built up in ourselves over years.
Some people actually allow the I should know this mentality to shrink themselves. And that's a really bad step. We lawyers are sadly guilty of having this notion, this complex that says, I must know that. And the reason for that is you can go to a wedding, you can go to a party, you can go to an event, and as soon as you say, I'm a lawyer, someone's going to ask you a question. You know, my cousin just got fired from a job. What should she do? As though you've got this sort of chat GPT processor going on in your brain, and you've got this answer like points 1, 2, and 3. No, no. We lawyers are a very wide group of people with different experiences and different practice groups. And even within any one practice group, I'm going to have family lawyers who are going to know way more about one area of family law than I will ever know about that. And so I, in my later years, now feel comfortable saying to people, I don't know the answer to that, but if you would like, I could research it, which, by the way, happens to be a very good way of selling legal services. Because if you give somebody the answer that you're not positive about, you're not sure about, you're actually doing a disservice to both you and them because you're providing an answer that may not necessarily be a reliable answer. That's number one. Number two is you're letting the buyer think that you've got all the answers in your head, which therefore means that when you try to bill the client in the future for maybe reading 3 or 4 hours of case law, they're going to be like, why are you charging me for that? I thought you knew that. You went to law school, didn't you? So you actually need to recognize what you don't know and confidently say, I don't know that. Now, that's for legal services. But what about I don't know how to set up a newsletter on MailChimp? Or I don't know how to shoot a video about foreign divorces in Ontario for YouTube. Okay, fair enough. Not all of us know that. In fact, very few do. But guess what? You go onto the internet, you go onto ChatGPT, you go onto YouTube, and you ask, give me a video on how to create a newsletter for a law firm. Or you go onto YouTube and you go, show me how to load a video that I just shot on my computer on YouTube, or how to create a YouTube channel. I'm just using those as small examples. If the question is, how do I do this non-billable business development, marketing, or clerical job, then research it. And then guess what? If you graduated high school, graduated undergrad, graduated law school, got called to the bar, there's a very high probability that if you want to learn how to set up a MailChimp newsletter, you're going to figure it out pretty fast. So therefore, this notion of I should know, I don't know, and now I'm throwing in the towel, that's just a mistake because it's in you. And if you work with a coach, someone like Paulette, you're going to have that person bring out the capacity that's inside of you. And you're going to achieve the very thing that maybe right now you think I can't do it.
I just had an idea, Steve. Every morning, we're just going to have you record a 1 minute, self-help tip. Like be great today or learn something new. I've learned so much from you these last in these last few minutes, all these tips and tricks you have. All right, so why don't we move on to our next topic? which is effective delegation and team management. What a great one, because we've seen a lot of questions come in about this. Who
You
wants to?
know, I'll just jump in, Paulette, if that's okay with you.
Go for
You
it.
know, when I was a young lawyer, um, at the office, there were different levels of lawyers. You know, there was the 40-year-old lawyer, like 40 years of practice, 30 years of practice, 20 years. And it ended in terms of billing somewhere around the junior lawyer articling student place. We're at a place right now where, certainly in family and estates law, clients are very cost conscious. And they would be more than happy to have someone less expensive than the lawyer do the job. Why am I saying this? Because if you actually delegate and you bill out the junior at the office, the law clerk at the office, the law student at the office at a much lower hourly rate than you're actually winning on many levels. Number one, psychologically, you're elevating that person. They're no longer a gopher. They're a responsible party to this project, whatever that project might be. Number two, whatever you're paying them on payroll, you're going to bill them out for more. So if it's an articling student, you might be billing them out for 125 an hour, but you're actually only paying them 30 or 40. If it's a law clerk, you might be paying them $50,000 to $100,000 a year, but you might actually be billing them out per year at $200,000 or $300,000 a year. And by the way, the more you bill them out, the more savings the client benefits from, the less work the lawyer does, the more profit the lawyer does, the more satisfied the client is. It's a win, win, win. And so when we talk about this category, it's so critical that when we look at the ladder of services in a law firm, we don't only bill out at the top rung or the top two or three rungs. The more you bill out at the lowest rungs, the more money you earn, the more satisfied your clients are, the higher the turnaround in terms of the project. And that's, by the way, where really effective hiring and training is so critical. Because if the low end person is able to do the job successfully, the client's going to be thrilled that they only paid 125 an hour for 4 hours instead of 500 an hour for 2 hours. It's a win-win.
I would just say to this topic, in my experience observing lawyers who have difficulty delegating, I think it goes into this bigger topic of leadership. And what I mean by that is, like, leadership requires some proactivity, some sitting down, some, visioning. And so does delegation. But a lot of people are reactive in their practices, right? So they are putting out fires all the time, all day long. They don't feel that they can afford to delegate because that just takes too much time. If they just, took the time to do it themselves, they would be much more efficient, which is a wrong conclusion to draw. Steve is nodding and agrees. Because it requires for you to spend time on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis to look at the bigger picture and see what needs to be done, how much time it's going to take, break things down into manageable pieces, and then figuring out the best people using and leveraging their strengths to accomplish those tasks for you. And so you're right. If you are just going to constantly be, using your fire hose to be putting out fires, you're not going to be an effective delegator. You won't. In fact, you'll find that it won't work for you at all. You'll get frustrated and it'll just reinforce for you that you'll never do it again. But you'll have to try it a different way, which is to set time aside every day and ask yourself, what do I need to do and who can help me to do it, and include those aspects that Steve said as well. Who will be the best suited price point for this task given what needs to be accomplished? So you do have to think bigger picture when it comes to delegation, which I would also say falls into that leadership category where you are thinking, team orientation and beyond just the scope of you yourself as an individual unit. You've got other people helping you, and as a result, you need to be thinking about them and designing for them as well. This is a design issue as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks so much, guys, for great comments. And that leads us really nicely into our next topic, business development and client acquisition. Paulette, do you mind giving us a little bit of information about that?
Yeah, I see the time, so I'll just mention two things as quick as I can without watering it down. Steve already talked about some other things that you could be doing in terms of like the social aspect of it and like community. I would like to focus on the consultation process if I can. Am I jumping too far ahead, Michelle, if I do that?
No, Paulette, the floor is yours. You go right
Yeah.
ahead.
So consultations, because I know that a lot of family lawyers offer consultations as a way to get business. And so I did want to address this with the audience because there are two main issues that I see so far in my practice with family lawyers who do the consultation work is one, they don't have a process, they don't have a design, going back to my earlier point. Even though they understand the importance of it, that's the way you generate business, because they haven't been trained or haven't taken the time to really understand the importance of it, they see it as an inconvenience. So in the middle of the day, they're working on, motion materials, and now they've got to do a consultation. Oh, now I've got to do a consultation. Like I really could be using this time better for, something else. Whereas like this is the engine of the business, right? And so part of that I think is a lack of thinking about like what is the process. If you don't have a process, you end up defaulting to whatever that person shows up and brings to your lap for a consultation. So you should have in mind, even writing it out, like what your process is. Like step one, I, introduce myself, I say this and the other. This step two, like, I ask them like these specific questions. Like you should know what your process is and how you end it. In terms of, is it, this vague question, like, okay, like I'll just wait to hear from you, which I would suggest is not a very effective end to a consultation process, but you should have an understanding about what your process is. And then the second piece is that I find that a lot of lawyers tend to privilege the competency aspect of their brand. So there's so much that goes into this topic, but in a nutshell, in my mind, there are two components to a brand. There's the competence aspect of it, what you know. So obviously as lawyers, that's clear. But then the second aspect of it is warmth. And I'm just using the language from some research that I think is included in some of the additional materials on social psychology on client retention. So the research is 82% of clients want to know your competence and your warmth before agreeing to purchase your services. And warmth isn't, let me just dispel that right now. It's not like, giving somebody a hug. The warmth aspect is really just another way of describing like what your intentions are, like your why. Like, why do you do the things that you do in the way that you do them? Why do you approach the practice of law in the way that you do? People want to know not only are you capable of doing what they're asking you to do, but how are you going to do that, right? So I find that a lot of lawyers spend so much time on the competence aspect of it, just showcasing their knowledge. People don't actually pick up on the kind of human being that you are. And that can leave somebody feeling suspicious and distrustful, frankly. And so it's a balance. It's not, like I said, as simple as like, oh, you're just going to give everybody a hug. That's not what this is about. This is understanding like what your own personal values are. Um, if for me, authenticity is, a personal value of mine. And so when I'm meeting people in my own consultation process, I know that I'm doing my job well if I allow like my quirky moments to come out. And if I leave a conversation and I feel really stiff, I know that I haven't been authentic and I know that I haven't really let that person know who I am and why they should trust me to be their coach. So it's that humanistic side. That can feel really uncomfortable for some people. And it doesn't have to be so much, but you have to show some of it, is what I'm suggesting. So those two pieces, like that, rounding out your brand to demonstrate the why piece and that warmth, and then having a process to begin with is really important for the consultation process. Because if you're going to be spending a significant amount of time in there, you better do it right, because you can change that conversion rate so much. And I've helped people do that. So don't undermine that process, because you're really shooting yourself in the foot, aren't you?
Yeah, that's some great points, Paulette. Thank you so much. All right, Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit about financial literacy and practice management?
Sure. In fact, I'm going to pick up on where Paula left off, which is the consultation. So, assuming you've done a very good job establishing yourself as a viable business, you provide legal services, let's just say in family law, and the emails come in, the phone rings, however the initial contact is made by the prospective client and you, the lawyer or the law clerk. Um, we live in a world right now where people ascribe value based on price tag. If you walk into a store and you see a lovely jacket that you want, and it's all of a sudden the tag indicates it's extremely cheap, right away you wonder what is this made out of, or is this going to last more than one or two wears? But if you look at the tag and it's extremely expensive, you're going to examine it a little bit more closer. You're going to appreciate it. You're going to maybe look at the 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 fabric that went into it, the brand name, the reputation, and that's very similar to the purchase of legal services. And so there's not a person in Canada that can't drive up or down a street and see personal injury lawyers advertising free consultation. And so the rest of us lawyers, like family law lawyers, we often get calls from people. Do you offer a free consultation? And my answer, and this is an answer that I've come through from many, many years of studying the subject, my answer is no. Because when I speak to a person, I cherish their time. Their time is valuable, and my time is valuable. And if I'm going to speak to somebody, if I'm going to take myself away from something that's important to give somebody else the importance of my time, I'm going to honor their time, and I'm going to engage with them. I'm going to help them. I'm going to analyze their situation, and I'm going to give them advice. So I do not want a client who is looking for something for free. I don't offer anything for free. And in fact, most retailers do not offer anything for free. And so after at least 6, 7, 8 years of university and 30, 32 years of law practice, I don't think anybody would fault me for admitting openly that I don't offer anything for free. But what I do offer is high quality legal advice, strategic planning, and process design to assist them from where they are to where they want to go. And so, from a financial literacy standpoint, anybody should first look in the mirror and go, do I have value to the caller? If the answer is no, then do it for free. If the answer is yes, state your rate and confidently express why you charge for your time. You don't have to say it over and over each time when they call. You can put it on your website. You could put it on your LinkedIn page. It could be public information. It could even be an outgoing voicemail message on your call. Whatever you do, you're either declining clients who only are looking towards you as a freebie or as a deal. You don't want those clients. You are also screening out those people, but screening in the people that value your time. And that carries through to the retainer agreement, to the bill, and ultimately to the advice that you give them to settle their case or to go to trial. So you've got to start with having value for yourself. You've got to demonstrate that value to those that are knocking on your door. You've got to deliver value so that the person who gets your bill compares it with what they've got from you and they run to pay the bill. And then beyond that, they then give you a Google review and then tell all their friends about you. That is financial literacy. And that carries through at so many different stages. So when a client says to you after a case conference, what do we do now? You could say, well, you can follow the judge's advice at the case conference. If the other side agrees, we could settle, or we can go to questioning, or we can go to a motion, or we can go to trial. And I just want you to know that to do that for you, it will require X amount of hours of preparing X documents, and the cost will be X. And if that's what you want to do, we can do that. But you're going to have to provide us with a deposit to do that project. And if you want that done and you provide that deposit, we will therefore do that thing that you are just directing us to do. Last thing you want is to be financially illiterate, where the client says, do that thing because they don't have to pay for it, or they think they don't have to pay for it, or they think there's going to be a result that they don't get. Then you do it, and the result isn't exactly what they wanted. And then they say to you, why am I going to pay for that? Now you've got a disgruntled client, a disgruntled lawyer, the end of a relationship, and by the way, bad debt. So financial literacy requires self-worth, the demonstration of self-worth, but the ongoing establishment that you are a valuable professional, providing valuable services, and expecting clients to respect the service that you provide.
That's wonderful advice, Steve. Thanks so much. All right, Paulette, why don't we talk a little bit about investing in professional coaching? Because that's what you do. And tell us a little bit about your services and why it brings such great value.
Yeah, I work with lawyers exclusively. As mentioned earlier, I transitioned from law practice to coaching because I recognized this skill set that I didn't possess as a lawyer. And the more I started studying other skill sets to help me become a better lawyer, I enjoyed those more than the actual practice of law. So I work with lawyers and offer them two sort of buckets of services, either looking for work and excelling at work. In terms of excelling at work, it's professional development, helping you to execute your goals, helping you to clarify what your professional development goals are, offering a fresh perspective, giving you basically time and space, judgment-free space where you get to come and plan and really think aloud about what it is that you're working on. And as a result, you have somebody who starts to really understand you and really becomes a good partner for a variety of things that you could be working on. And I think as a result, it builds your confidence, and it does have tangible results, like I was talking about earlier, like increasing your client acquisition rates, things like practice management, improving your time management. To Steve's point, improving your self-worth, helping you to design things like, raise your fees, making that decision around, like, do I charge for consultations? Do I not charge for consultations? All of that training and all of those things where we didn't get in law school. Basically, I can help you with those pieces, help you with those should knows, to that mindset of I can figure this out, and by the way, this is knowledge and information that grows with me and my practice no matter where I go, in terms of making that investment for yourself, as opposed to relying on your firm or an organization to pay for it. I have a lot of lawyers who come to me and pay for it out of pocket because they understand this is an investment in themselves and that it's going to go with them wherever they go. And it's work that I really love doing. I've been doing it for 15 years, and I hope to do it for a little while longer.
That's amazing. All right. So the questions have been pouring in. So I'm going to throw a couple to you guys if you don't mind. I know we are just over our time, but I think we've got some buffer in there. Do you mind giving us about 5 minutes of your time still? Awesome. All right. So, Steve, I'm going to send this one to you. What's the role of retainers and billing to financial health?
A retainer is no different than a contract between you and Bell Canada or you and the seller of the house that you are buying. If you don't have a contract, you don't have consensus ad idem, you don't have a meeting of the minds, you don't have reasonable expectations of one another. And we, in 2025, live in an era where the Law Society of Ontario would wonder what kind of lawyer you are if you don't have a retainer agreement. And that retainer agreement does not have to be pro forma, the one that you download. After you have dealt with different scenarios, depending on the area of law that you do, the nature of work that you do, how you do it, and so forth, you can put in terms in there that express to the client things that you do and things that you don't do. So, for example, I'll use a basic one. There's still a lot of lawyers that collect a retainer when they open up the account, and then when they bill against the existing retainer. We don't do that at my firm. That retainer sits there until the very end. And every time we bill a client, generally speaking, between the $2,000 to $3,000 mark, while we have $5,000 in the retainer in the trust account. And that way, the client is conditioned at low-level bills to know what things cost, so that when they send us back and forth 30 or 40 emails in the course of a week, they realize very quickly what that costs. And there's conditioning involved in that exercise. And that's right in the retainer agreement. Another one is some clients think that because we live in an era where all of us have iPhones, that means that they can communicate with us 24/7, weekends and holidays. Well, retainer agreements, no different than a sign on a store, says the open hours. And when a client says, I sent you an email on Saturday, I didn't hear back from you until Monday, you can very honestly say, oh, I'm so sorry you forgot, but this is contained at paragraph such and such of the retainer agreement. And so another thing is some clients will say, well, I want a copy of my whole file. Well, in the retainer agreement, it could say throughout the course of the retainer, everything that I get or send out, you get a copy of it contemporaneously, so that at the end of your case, you've got everything and there will never be a need to package it all up and send it to you or to another lawyer in the future. So whatever situation might arise is covered in the retainer agreement. And generally speaking, you cannot sign another retainer agreement during the retainer. So you actually have to think in advance, what am I getting myself into? And for those of you that do not want to find themselves locked into not only a retainer agreement, but being solicitor of record, you have to think about, is this going to be a full service retainer agreement? or a limited scope, or also called unbundled legal service, in which case you are narrowing the scope of the expectations of the client and of the court and of opposing counsel of you. And although some judges may not like the notion of agent work, that's a tool that the Law Society has approved and that you as a lawyer are permitted to execute with respect to clients. And if you've got a client that you're not so sure about, do I want to get on the record? Will this client be able to afford having me on for the totality of the case? Then that's a conversation that you should have with a client to determine the limitations on the nature of the retainer.
Thanks so much. That was such a well-rounded answer, Steve. I really appreciate it. And I actually wrote some notes for our own retainer agreement. I will check to see if we have our hours of practice in there. I do not think we do. Paulette, this one came in for you. What were your biggest challenges when you first launched your niche practice, and how have those evolved over time?
Well, I remember I was practicing at a big law firm. I knew that I didn't want to be there, but I was conflating this notion of leaving and needing to have another job. So in my instance, despite all the great advice that I was getting, I just ended up resigning one day, much to the surprise of my husband, where I came home one day and said, I really, I mean, this was a conversation that we had had for a couple of years, but it was not a decision that I was prepared to make anytime soon, but I kind of had reached a breaking point. All of that background is to say that when I started my coaching practice, I had a pro bono client. So I had used my vacation time while I was practicing to take mediation courses, to take coaching courses. I mentioned earlier that I had invested in all this extra training, and I found that that training was where I was really actually thriving and realizing that's something that I wanted to invest in. So I had done like all of that work. And through the coaching training, there is like some business development that is part of that training and education. So I was working with pro bono clients and had one at the time, but didn't have like a website at the time. This was in 2010. So it's a different era for people in the audience who are wondering, like, you didn't have a website. It was 2010. So that the challenge for me was to build a business really and to start thinking about it from scratch. And I needed that personally for my own journey. I was not going to do that if I had remained where I was and started to build all of those steps. I needed to treat those decisions as separate. I needed to leave the firm because it wasn't a good place for me in terms of my strengths and values. And then I needed to start working on this business. So basically, to answer your question, I needed to learn everything, Michelle. And it took me some time. I continued to work part-time as a lawyer, offering services to another lawyer on a part-time basis, on a consulting basis. So I did those two things as I grew my coaching practice. And then after about 5 or 6 years, I parted ways with that lawyer and went full-time. So I've been full-time about 10 years. I continue to practice. I am also very involved in my community. I offer pro bono legal services. So I haven't given up my skill set completely, but I'm just not charging for my legal skills. And every year, I love what I do, because every year I get to choose a different area that I want to learn. So in terms of what I'm continuing to learn, like I haven't stopped learning. Most recently, I've really gotten into how to express empathy and to provide empathetic services. And so for me, it's taking things that are just little pet projects and really deepening them. And so that's been a pet project of mine most recently. And I just love how nerdy I can get on subjects, and I get to pay for whatever I want because that's my own business development. And I really do love what I do because it allows me to explore the things that I am passionate about.
Well, Paulette and Steve, thank you so much for donating your time, sharing your knowledge, telling us all of your wonderful stories, and giving us so many tips and tricks. So just a reminder to everyone, this has been accredited for 1 hour of professionalism with the Law Society. There's a ton of resources in the show notes that will be sent to you later today. And it includes contact information and Paulette's website, which I'll be honest, Paulette, I did go on and poke around in your website when we first met. So I'm really excited for everyone to get this. Thank you both so much. We truly appreciate you being on here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thank you. Thank you.